A scream tears through the night, sharp, human, then suddenly silenced. The beach lies still again, no footprints, no trace, just the echo of something that shouldn't exist. And far beyond that quiet shore, hidden from the world, a child is about to become a legend. On an island untouched by time, where cliffs rise like guardians, and the sea itself feels sacred, young Diana runs barefoot across warm stone, laughter in her breath, fire in her eyes. She isn't like the others, not really. While the Amazons train with discipline carved into their bones, she watches with hunger. Every clash of sword, every shield strike, she wants it, needs it, needs it. Her mother, Queen Hippolyta, sees that spark and fears it. Not yet, Hippolyta insists, her voice calm but unshakable. But Diana doesn't understand, not yet. To her, it feels like never. And something inside her refuses to accept that. So, she trains in secret. Hidden between towering rocks, under golden sunlight, Diana mimics every movement she's ever seen. Her arms tremble. Her breath breaks. She falls, gets up, falls again, and then a shadow moves behind her. General Antiope, watching. Silence. Diana freezes, caught. But instead of anger, Antiope steps forward, eyes sharp, measuring. She doesn't scold, she doesn't stop her. She simply says, again. And just like that, everything changes. Days turn into years. The child becomes a warrior, faster, stronger, relentless. Every strike echoes louder. Every lesson cuts deeper. But there's something different about Diana, something even the Amazons can't explain. When she fights, it's not just skill, it's instinct, raw, uncontrolled. And that scares Hippolyta more than anything. Because long before Diana was born, a story was told, a warning wrapped in myth, of a god named Ares, of war itself, of destruction waiting to return. And a weapon, the only one capable of stopping him. Diana believes that weapon is a sword. Hippolyta knows the truth is far more dangerous, but she says nothing. Because some truths change everything. Then, one day, the sky breaks. A thunderous explosion rips through the clouds. Diana looks up, heart pounding, as a metal bird screams across the horizon, spiraling out of control. Fire trails behind it like a dying star. It crashes into the sea. Without thinking, Diana runs. Waves crash violently as she dives in, the cold biting into her skin. Beneath the surface, darkness, wreckage, and a man. Unconscious, sinking. She grabs him, pulls, fights the ocean itself to drag him back to shore. And when he opens his eyes, everything changes. Because he's not like them. Not Amazon, not myth. Human, a spy, a soldier, a man from a world Diana has never seen and cannot imagine. His name is Steve Trevor, and he brings news that fractures everything the Amazons believed was hidden forever. War. Not just battle, not just conflict. A war that consumes the world beyond their shores. Cities burning, millions dying, weapons that poison the air itself. A darkness spreading faster than anyone can stop it. Diana listens, every word sinking deeper than the last. This is Ares, she thinks. It has to be. War like this doesn't just happen. It's him. It's always been him. And if Ares is out there, then this is why she was trained. This is why she was born. Purpose. Clear. Burning. Unavoidable. But Hippolyta refuses. No true Amazon leaves this island, she says, her voice final. Protective. Desperate. But Diana isn't hearing protection anymore. She's hearing chains. That night she walks alone. The island feels different now. Smaller. Quieter. Like it's holding her back instead of keeping her safe. Steve's words echo in her mind. People dying. A world she's never seen, crying out. And she knows. If she stays here, she does nothing. If she leaves, everything changes. She looks out at the endless ocean, the horizon glowing faintly under moonlight. Freedom and danger waiting on the other side. Her hands tighten. This is a mistake. She knows it, but she also knows she's going anyway. Because somewhere out there, war is raging. And deep down, she believes she's the only one who can stop it. The decision is made in silence. No ceremony, no permission. Just resolve hardening behind Diana's eyes as the island sleeps, unaware that everything is about to change. She moves like a shadow through familiar paths, but tonight they feel foreign, like she already doesn't belong. The armory doors creak open. Inside legend. Her fingers brush against ancient metal. The God-Killer's sword. The shield. And then the lasso. It hums softly as she lifts it, something alive within its golden glow. Not just a weapon, something more. Something she doesn't fully understand. But she takes it anyway. Footsteps. Hippolyta stands at the entrance. Silence stretches between them, heavy, painful. A mother looking at her daughter and seeing a goodbye she cannot stop. "You don't know what you're walking into," Hippolyta says, voice breaking beneath control. Diana steps forward. "It's my duty. No anger, just truth. And that's what hurts the most." For a moment, it almost feels like Hippolyta will stop her, command her, forbid it. But instead, she steps aside, because she knows. Some paths cannot be blocked. Dawn breaks over the ocean as Diana stands beside Steve at the edge of the world she's ever known. A small boat waits, fragile against the endless sea. The wind carries something unfamiliar now, not peace, but change. Steve watches her carefully. There's something unsettling about her calm, about the way she looks at the horizon like she's already at war with it. "You've never left this place, have you?" he asks. Diana shakes her head. "A beat. Then you're going to see things you can't unsee." She meets his gaze. "I don't want to." And just like that, they leave. Themyscira fades behind them, swallowed by distance. The only home Diana has ever known, disappearing into myth once more. Hours pass, then days. The world grows louder, stranger. By the time they reach London, it hits her all at once. Noise, smoke, crowds pressing in from every side. Horses, engines, shouting voices layered over each other like chaos made real. Diana steps onto the street, frozen, not from fear, but from overload. So much life. So much movement, so much suffering hidden beneath it. Her eyes scan everything. Women in tight clothing, restricted, watched. Men in suits rushing past without seeing anything beyond themselves. It doesn't make sense to her, none of it. "Where are their swords?" she asks, confused. Steve almost laughs. Almost. This isn't that kind of war, but she sees it in the tired faces, in the soldiers limping through the streets, in the newspapers screaming headlines of death. War is everywhere, just dressed differently. They move quickly through the city, Steve pulling her into his world, a world of secrets and urgency. He gathers a small team, men who look worn down, each carrying their own scars. A spy, a smuggler, a man who speaks too many languages and trusts too few people. Diana studies them. They're nothing like Amazons, but they follow Steve anyway, and that tells her enough. Soon, they're inside a war room. Generals arguing over maps, over strategies, over numbers that represent lives like they're nothing more than pieces on a board. Diana listens, and then she hears it. A name. A German general. Developing a new weapon. Deadlier than anything before. Gas that doesn't just kill, but erases entire villages. Her breath catches. This is it. Ares, it has to be. She steps forward, interrupting men twice her age, twice her rank. Men who look at her like she doesn't belong there. "We must stop him," she says. They ignore her, talk over her, dismiss her, and something inside Diana snaps. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. She doesn't see politicians anymore. She sees delay. She sees people choosing to do nothing while others die. Unacceptable. She turns to Steve, eyes burning now. "You said this war could not be stopped," she says quietly. "But you're wrong." Steve hesitates, because for the first time, he's not sure. Not about her, not about anything. And as Diana walks out of that room, armor hidden beneath civilian clothes, purpose sharper than ever, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. She's not here to understand mankind. She's here to save it, or break whatever stands in her way trying. The boat cuts through thick gray fog, the engine rattling like it might fall apart any second. Diana stands at the front, wind hitting her face, eyes locked ahead. Something feels wrong, not fear, something heavier, like the air itself is warning her. And then she sees it. A wall, not stone, not metal, men, hundreds of them, buried in trenches carved into the earth like scars that refuse to heal. Mud clings to everything, boots, uniforms, faces. The smell hits next. Rot, smoke, death lingering just beneath every breath. Diana steps down slowly. Confusion flickers across her face. This isn't war. This is suffering. Steve moves beside her, quieter now. "This is the front," he says. "No man's land. No man's land." The words echo strangely, because right now it looks like no life's land. A distant explosion shakes the ground. Dirt rains down. Dirt rains down. A soldier screams somewhere out of sight. Another doesn't move at all. Diana watches, and something inside her begins to crack. A woman clutches a child nearby, both trembling, both starving. Their eyes meet Diana's for just a second, and in that moment, everything becomes personal. This isn't strategy. This isn't politics. This is people. "Why are they still here?" Diana asks, her voice tight. Steve doesn't answer right away. "Because there is no good answer. Because they can't cross," he finally says. "Machine guns, snipers, it's suicide." Diana turns toward the battlefield. Across the open stretch, barbed wire, craters, bodies. Silence hanging heavy before the next storm of bullets. "They're dying," she whispers. Steve steps closer. "We can't save everyone." Wrong answer. Her jaw tightens. A soldier nearby laughs bitterly, shaking his head. "We've been here a year. 1 step forward, 10 steps back. That's war." Diana looks at him. "No, that's not war. That's failure." Her breathing changes. Slower, deeper, controlled, but burning underneath. She reaches down, unfastens her cloak. Steve sees it too late. "Diana, don't." Too late. She steps forward, out of the trench, into no man's land. Time slows. The first bullet hits her shield with a deafening crack, then another, then dozens. The sky erupts with gunfire, soldiers shouting, chaos breaking loose as every enemy weapon turns toward her. But she doesn't stop. Step. Another bullet. Step. Faster now. Bullets rain against her like steel hail, each impact echoing through the battlefield. But she pushes forward, unstoppable. Her body moves like it was made for this. Like every second of training, every moment of restraint was leading here. This, right now. She plants her feet, raises the shield, and absorbs everything. Machine gun fire screams against her, but she stands, unmoving, unbreakable. And behind her, something shifts. A soldier climbs out, then another, and another. Hope. It spreads like fire. Men who had given up, now charging forward behind a woman who refuses to fall. Steve watches, stunned. Because this isn't strategy anymore. This is belief. Diana surges ahead, smashing through barbed wire, deflecting bullets, drawing all fire toward herself. The enemy line falters. Confused, overwhelmed. And then, she runs. Fast, powerful, closing the distance. Leaps into the trench. Impact. The fight becomes close, brutal, immediate. Diana moves like a storm shield striking. Fists landing, enemies falling one after another. No hesitation, no mercy for those who chose this. Steve and his team follow, pushing through the chaos, clearing paths, taking ground that was thought impossible to take. Within minutes, the impossible happens. The line breaks. Silence falls. And for the first time in what feels like forever, the guns stop. Diana stands in the middle of it all, breathing heavy, surrounded by the aftermath of something no one thought could happen. Victory. But as she looks around, at the wounded, the broken, the ones who didn't make it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the beginning of something much bigger, much darker. Because if this is what war looks like at the front, then what kind of monster is behind it? Smoke still drifts through the broken village, curling into the cold air like ghosts that refuse to leave. The silence feels unnatural, like the battlefield is holding its breath after what just happened. Diana walks slowly through the aftermath, her boots sinking into mud stained with victory and loss. People emerge, cautiously at first, then faster. Villagers step out from shattered homes, eyes wide, unsure if this is real. A woman reaches out, trembling, touching Diana's arm like she's afraid she might disappear. Then, smiles. Tears. Gratitude spilling out in a language Diana doesn't even understand, but she feels it. Hope. For the first time since she left home, she sees it, and it hits her harder than any bullet. Maybe she was right. Maybe she can end this. That night, the village glows with fragile celebration. Music plays softly. Laughter returns in broken pieces. Steve watches Diana from across the room as children gather around her, fascinated, safe because of her. But something about her feels distant, like she's already somewhere else. "You did something they'll remember forever," Steve says, stepping closer. Diana looks at him, her expression calm but searching. It's not enough. The words land heavier than expected. Because she's right. One village saved doesn't end a war. But in Diana's mind, the path is simple. Find Ares. Kill him. End everything. Later, Steve brings her new information. Whispers of a high-ranking German general preparing a devastating attack. A gala. A gathering of power. The perfect place to strike. Diana's eyes sharpen. This is it. No more waiting. No more watching people suffer while men argue behind closed doors. They move at dawn. The journey to the enemy stronghold is quiet. Too quiet. Even Steve feels it now. That strange pull around Diana. She's not questioning anymore. Not hesitating. She's certain. And certainty can be dangerous. By nightfall, they arrive. Lights blaze inside the grand estate, music echoing through polished halls. Officers laugh, drink, celebrate, completely untouched by the destruction they've unleashed outside these walls. Diana steps inside, disguised among them. Her eyes scan every face, searching, hunting, and then she sees him. General Ludendorff. Power radiates off him like something unnatural, cold, controlled. His presence alone feels wrong, like the air tightens around him. Diana's breath slows. This is Ares. It has to be. Everything inside her aligns in that moment. Every story, every instinct, every step that brought her here. This ends now. She moves through the crowd, silent, unstoppable. Steve notices too late again. Diana, wait. She doesn't. The music fades into nothing as she closes the distance. Her hand tightens around the sword hidden beneath her dress. One strike. That's all it takes. She pulls the blade free and lunges. Steel flashes. The room erupts into chaos. But Ludendorff moves faster than expected, dodging, striking back, his strength shocking, unnatural. Diana doesn't falter, every movement sharp, precise, fueled by something deeper than training now. Belief. They crash through doors, into open air, the fight spilling out into the night. Explosions light the sky as Diana presses forward, relentless. This is it, the god of war. The end of everything. With one final surge, she drives the sword forward, through him. Silence. Ludendorff gasps, then falls, dead. Diana stands over him, chest rising, waiting. For something to change. The war should stop. The world should breathe again. But nothing happens. In the distance, guns still fire. Explosions still tear through the night. Screams still echo. Diana's expression shifts. Confusion. No, that's not possible. She steps back slowly, eyes locked on the lifeless body. If you are Ares, she whispers, voice cracking slightly, then why is the war still happening? The answer doesn't come. Only silence. And for the first time since she left the Themyscira, Diana doesn't know what's true anymore. The world doesn't stop. That's the first thing Diana realizes, and it hits harder than any blade. She stands there, staring at Ludendorff's body, waiting for silence to fall across the battlefield, waiting for the guns to stop. They don't. Explosions still roar in the distance. Smoke still rises. Men are still dying. Her breath trembles. This wasn't supposed to happen. Behind her, Steve watches closely. He sees it, the crack forming in something that once felt unbreakable. You killed him, Steve says carefully. Diana shakes her head, almost in disbelief. He was Ares. No, Steve replies, voice firm but quiet. He was just a man. Just a man. The words land like a Shia inside her chest. No, that's not possible. Because if he was just a man, then all of this, every death, every scream, every broken body, that's not a god's doing. That's them. Humanity. That's them. Humanity. Diana steps back, her mind racing, rejecting it. No, they wouldn't do this. Not without him. Not without Ares pulling the strings. But even as she says it, doubt creeps in. Because she's seen them now. The fear, the anger, the hate, and the choice. Steve moves closer. This war, it's not about one enemy you can kill. It's bigger than that. Bigger. Diana's world begins to fracture. Everything she believed, every story, every purpose, built on the idea that evil had a face, a name, something she could destroy. But what if it doesn't? What if it's everywhere? Silence. For a moment, she feels small, lost. And then, a slow clap echoes behind them. Sharp, deliberate. Diana turns. A man steps forward from the shadows, untouched by the chaos around him. Calm, almost amused. His eyes meet hers. Not with fear, not with surprise, recognition. I was wondering when you'd realize, he says. His voice is smooth, familiar in a way that feels wrong. Steve stiffens. Sir Patrick? Diana's gaze sharpens. Something clicks. Too late. The air shifts. The man straightens, something ancient rising beneath his calm expression. The warmth disappears. What's left is something far older, far colder. I tried to guide them, he continues softly. I gave them ideas, inspiration, but they do the rest all on their own. Diana's heart pounds. No, you, her voice lowers, steady but shaking underneath. You are Ares. A small smile. God of war, he replies. And suddenly, everything makes sense. Not the war, but the deception. He didn't create it. He didn't need to. Humanity did that themselves. He just watched, nurtured it, let it grow. Diana's grip tightens around her weapon. Anger surges, but beneath it, something deeper. Betrayal, not just by him, by everything she believed. They don't deserve your protection, Ares says, stepping closer. I tried to make them better, but they are corrupt. Broken. Broken. You've seen it. Images flash through Diana's mind. Trenches, suffering, cruelty. Truth she can't deny. They destroy themselves, Ares continues. And now you can join me. End it. Wipe them out. Start again. The offer hangs in the air. Heavy. Tempting. Because part of her understands it. After everything she's seen, maybe they are beyond saving. Her hand trembles. Steve watches her, fear creeping in. Diana, Ares extends his hand. You are stronger than them, better than them. This world doesn't deserve you. Silence stretches. Diana's eyes lower. For a second, it feels like she might actually consider it. And that's what makes this moment terrifying, because the greatest battle she's about to face isn't against Ares, it's against what she's starting to believe. The air turns heavy, not with smoke, not with war, with power. Ares lifts his hand, and the ground trembles. Metal twists. Debris rises like it's being pulled by something unseen. Diana braces herself, eyes locked on him, but inside, the storm is worse. Because his words won't leave her. They don't deserve you. For a moment, just a moment, everything she's seen flashes again. The trenches, the cruelty, the way humans hurt each other without needing a god to command them. Her grip weakens, and Ares sees it. They will never change, he says, his voice pressing into her thoughts. I can show you. I can end their suffering. End all of it. The battlefield around them begins to shift, metal forming into weapons at his will. A sword flies into Diana's hand, tempting, powerful. Take it, Ares whispers. Be what you were born to be. Diana's breath shakes. This is the truth she wasn't ready for. Not that Ares exists, but that he might be right. Then, Steve's voice cuts through everything. Diana! She turns. He's running toward her, desperate, eyes filled with something raw. Not fear, not anger. Belief. You can't do this, he says, breath heavy. It's not about what they deserve. Ares scoffs softly behind her. Listen to him. One of them. One of the very creatures who destroy everything they touch. Steve doesn't back down. It's about what you believe, he says, stepping closer to Diana. You don't need a god to tell you what's right. The words hit differently. Not loud, but deep. Because for the first time since all of this began, someone isn't telling her who she is. They're asking her to decide. Ares' voice hardens. They will betray you. They will fail you. Just like they always have. Diana looks between them. Two worlds. Two truths. And only one choice. Then an explosion in the distance. Steve turns sharply. His face changes. Urgency. There's a plane, he says quickly, loaded with gas. If it reaches London, millions die. Diana's heart tightens. More death. More war. Ares smiles faintly. Let it happen. It only proves my point. But Steve shakes his head, already stepping back. I can stop it. Diana grabs his arm. You'll die. A pause. A small, almost broken smile crosses Steve's face. I can save today, he says quietly. You can save the world. And before she can stop him, he's gone, running toward the plane, toward something he knows he won't survive. Diana stands frozen. No, she whispers. But Ares steps forward, his patience gone now. Watch closely, he says. This is what they do. They destroy themselves, even when they think they're being heroes. Rage builds inside her, but it's tangled with something else now. Pain, confusion, loss before it even happens. The sky roars as the plane lifts. Steve inside it, alone. Diana's breath catches. And then, a blinding flash. The plane explodes in the sky. Gone. Just like that. Silence. For a second, the entire world feels like it stops. Diana doesn't move. Can't move. Something inside her breaks completely. Her knees almost give out, but she forces herself to stand. Her eyes burn, not just with grief, but with something deeper. Understanding. Steve didn't do it because humanity deserves saving. He did it because he chose to. Because even in a broken world, good still exists. Ares watches her carefully. See? He says softly. Pointless. But Diana slowly lifts her head, tears still in her eyes. But something else has replaced the doubt. Clarity. No, she says, her voice steadier now, stronger. It's not about deserve. Power begins to build around her, energy crackling through the air, responding to something awakening inside her. It's about what you believe. Ares' expression darkens, because now she's no longer listening to him, and that changes everything. Everything goes quiet, not the battlefield, not the world, Just Diana. The explosion still burns in the sky, fragments of fire fading into darkness, but her eyes don't leave that spot. Steve is gone. No body, no goodbye, just a choice, and the cost of it. For a second, the world feels empty. Then, it fills with something else. Power. It surges through her. Not wild, not uncontrolled like before. Focused. Clear. Like every piece of her finally understands what it's meant to do. Ares feels it. His expression shifts just slightly. Interesting, he murmurs. Diana steps forward. No hesitation now. No doubt. You're wrong about them, she says, her voice calm but unbreakable. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to try. Ares's eyes darken. They will fail. Maybe, she answers, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve a chance. And that's when it happens. Lightning tears through the sky, called, not summoned. Energy explodes outward from Diana as she moves, faster than before, stronger than ever. She meets Ares head-on, their clash shaking the ground beneath them. God against God. Every strike echoes like thunder. Ares hurls metal, fire, destruction itself. But Diana pushes through it all, not because she's stronger, because she's chosen. Chosen what she believes. The fight intensifies. Ares grows more furious, more desperate, summoning everything around him into weapons. You could have ended it, he roars. You could have destroyed them all. Diana blocks, counters, advances. I don't want to destroy them, she fires back. Another clash. I want to save them. Ares strikes hard, sending her crashing back. The ground cracks beneath her. For a moment, the world spins, but she rises again, always rises. Because now she understands something he never will. It's not about gods, it's not about power, it's about choice. And humanity, for all its flaws, still chooses. Ares gathers everything, every piece of destruction, every ounce of rage, and hurls it toward her in one final, overwhelming force. Diana closes her eyes, not in fear, in focus. Steve's voice echoes in her mind. I can save today, you can save the world. Her hands rise. Energy builds brighter than anything before, and then she releases it. A blinding wave of power tears through the battlefield, meeting Ares' attack head-on and overpowering it. The force consumes him, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief. No, he breathes, but it's already over. The energy engulfs him completely. And then? Silence. Ares is gone, not defeated, ended. The battlefield settles. Slowly, the noise fades. Guns fall quiet. Soldiers lower their weapons, confusion replacing rage. It's not instant, not magical, but something shifts, like a storm finally breaking. Diana stands alone in the aftermath, breathing steady, the weight of everything settling around her. The war isn't gone, not completely, but something inside it has changed. She looks up at the sky again, empty now, but not in the same way. This time, it feels peaceful. Later, she walks through the quiet remains of the battlefield. Soldiers pass her, some nodding, some simply staring, unsure of what they just witnessed. A god, a warrior, a woman who chose to believe in them, even when they didn't deserve it. Diana pauses. Her hand tightens slightly, because she knows now. It was never about deserving. It was about love. Messy, complicated, imperfect, but real. And that is worth fighting for. She turns, walking forward into a world still healing, still broken, still trying. And for the first time, she's not searching for her purpose anymore. She's living it. Patty Jenkins was the right director for Wonder Woman for a reason that goes deeper than resume math. Yes, she had already made Monster in 2003 and directed acclaimed television work like The Killing. But those credits only tell half the story. The real fit was emotional. Jenkins had spent years talking about wanting to make a superhero film built not around cynicism or brute force, but around conviction, empathy, and moral clarity. That matters because Wonder Woman arrived at a moment when DC's cinematic universe was still associated with heaviness, destruction, and operatic gloom. Jenkins didn't reject that scale. She just wanted to thread something different through it, Grace. You can feel that from the first act onward, where Diana is framed not as a weapon waiting to be unleashed, but as an idealist learning what the world costs. And here's what gives Jenkins' authorship real weight. She was not parachuted in as a faceless studio technician. By her own later recollections, Warner Brothers' Ruthers had cycled through years of uncertainty and multiple script attempts before the version aligned with her vision finally took shape. That history hangs over the finished film in a fascinating way. Wonder Woman feels unusually resolved for a giant franchise entry because it had been fought over first. Jenkins understood that Diana could not simply be female Superman or female Batman. She needed her own cinematic grammar. That meant sincerity without naivety, strength without detachment, and spectacle tied to character rather than existing for its own sake. Superhero films live or die on tone. Jenkins found one that let the movie be mythic, romantic, funny, and bruising all at once. Her creative instincts make even more sense when you look backward. Monster was a raw, intimate character study about a damaged woman rendered with empathy rather than tabloid distance. That film won Jenkins major recognition early, and it announced a filmmaker drawn to women who are judged before they are understood. Diana is obviously a very different figure from Eileen Wuornos, but the connective tissue is there. Jenkins is interested in how a woman's interior life collides with the world's projections. In Wonder Woman, that becomes something almost classical. Diana enters a broken world and refuses to let its ugliness define her. Lesser directors might have leaned only into power. Jenkins keeps circling back to compassion. She treats kindness as a dramatic force, not a weakness. That choice becomes the movie's spine. The decision to set much of the story during World War I was one of Jenkins' smartest and most revealing moves. World War II would have been the more obvious comic book playground, cleaner in moral coding, easier to mythologize. World War I is murkier, sadder, more industrial in its cruelty. Jenkins argued that the setting created a sharper contrast between Diana's idealized understanding of human conflict and the horrifying complexity she encounters beyond Themyscira. That is not just a historical choice, it is a thematic one. The war becomes a testing ground for innocence. Diana arrives believing evil can be cut out like a tumor. The world teaches her otherwise, but Jenkins never lets the film collapse into despair. Instead, she stages a collision between purity of purpose and moral chaos. That tension gives the movie a pulse many origin stories never find. You can also see Jenkins reaching back to an older superhero tradition, especially Richard Donner's Superman. She has spoken about that influence, and it's all over the film's architecture. Not in imitation, but in attitude. The movie believes in heroic awe. It believes a character can walk into frame, and the camera can simply honor that presence. Modern superhero cinema often rushes to undercut itself with irony, as if earnestness were embarrassing. Jenkins goes the other way. When Diana steps onto no man's land, the scene works because the film has earned its own sincerity. No smirk, no wink, just a director trusting iconography. That kind of confidence is harder than it looks. It requires believing that audiences still want aspiration, not just attitude. Jenkins bet that they did. She was right. The industrial stakes were enormous. Warner Brothers released the film on June 2, 2017, and this was not some modest side experiment tucked into the franchise machine. It was a major studio tentpole that eventually grossed more than $800 million worldwide, including over $412 million domestically, after opening to about $103.3 million in North America. Those numbers matter because they reframed Jenkins' achievement in the language Hollywood listens to most closely. Proof. The movie was not only critically embraced, it became a commercial argument for what female-led, female-directed superhero filmmaking could do at blockbuster scale. But the stronger point is artistic. The success didn't come from sanding Diana down into existing franchise formulas. It came from letting Jenkins make a superhero movie with heart exposed. What makes Jenkins' direction linger, though, is the balance between reverence and accessibility. She clearly understood the symbolic weight of Wonder Woman as a character who had existed since the 1940s and had already become a cultural icon through comics and television. Yet the film never feels trapped by museum glass respectability. It moves, it jokes, it lets romance breathe. It lets Diana be curious, fierce, and occasionally amused by the absurdity of the human world. That's a difficult tonal cocktail. Too solemn, and the movie becomes homework. Too flippant, and the myth evaporates. Jenkins holds both ends. She gives Diana grandeur, then lets her look at a baby with warmth or stare at London with open bewilderment. The goddess and the young woman occupy the same frame. That's the directorial win. So when people talk about Wonder Woman as a breakthrough, they usually start with the headlines, firsts, records, industry milestones. All true, but those are outcomes. The cause was vision. Patty Jenkins knew this character could carry a blockbuster without surrendering tenderness, and she knew that sincerity was not outdated. It was the missing ingredient. That belief shapes every major creative choice in the film, from the mythic framing to the wartime setting to the refusal to make Diana emotionally cynical just to seem modern. And that's why the movie feels authored instead of assembled. But a director's vision is only the beginning. The next question is how that vision survived the page. Because the screenplay had to translate mythology, romance, war cinema, and franchise world-building into one coherent story. The screenplay for Wonder Woman didn't arrive fully formed. It was the result of years of iteration, false starts, and a delicate balancing act between mythology and mainstream blockbuster storytelling. The final credited writers, Alan Heinberg, along with story contributions from Zack Snyder and Jason Fuchs, were tasked with something deceptively complex: introduce an iconic character to a modern audience, embed her into an already established cinematic universe, and still make the story feel emotionally complete on its own. That's not just writing, it's architectural design under pressure. And somehow, the film makes it feel effortless. What makes the screenplay work is its clarity of perspective. This is Diana's story, unapologetically. Not the world's story with her inserted into it, but her experience of discovering that world. The structure leans into a classic, fish-out-of-water narrative, but it never becomes gimmicky. Instead, it uses Diana's innocence as a lens to critique human behavior. London isn't just a new location, it's a shock. The script allows moments to breathe here. Diana questioning social norms, reacting to war, struggling to reconcile her beliefs. These aren't throwaway beats, they're the foundation of her arc. You're not just watching events unfold, you're watching a worldview get tested in real time. The three-act structure is clean, almost classical in its execution. Act 1 builds mythology on Themyscira gods, Amazons, prophecy. It's mythic storytelling, almost operatic. Then Act 2 drops Diana into World War I Europe, shifting tone into something closer to a war drama with romantic and comedic undercurrents. That tonal pivot could have fractured the film. Instead, it deepens it. And then Act 3 pulls everything into a full-scale superhero climax where ideology and action collide. That progression from myth to reality to synthesis isn't accidental. It mirrors Diana's internal journey. The script is structured like her emotional evolution. Here's where the writing gets particularly sharp. The film refuses to give Diana easy answers. Early on, she believes Ares is the singular cause of human evil. Kill the god, end the war. Simple, clean, wrong. As the story unfolds, the screenplay gradually dismantles that belief, not through exposition, but through experience. Soldiers hesitate, civilians suffer, allies make morally gray decisions. By the time Diana confronts Ares, the real conflict isn't physical, it's philosophical. Do humans deserve saving if they're capable of such destruction? That question gives the climax weight beyond spectacle. Without it, the final battle would just be noise. Dialogue plays a huge role in maintaining that balance. The script avoids the overly quippy tone that dominates many modern superhero films. Humor is there, but it comes from character, not punchlines. Diana's literal interpretations of human customs create organic comedy. Steve Trevor's reactions ground those moments without undermining them. And when the film gets serious, the dialogue tightens. Lines become direct, almost blunt. I believe in love. That's not a clever line, it's a risky one. In a more cynical script, it might feel naive. Here, it lands because the film has earned it through everything Diana has experienced. Steve Trevor, written as more than just a love interest, is one of the screenplay's smartest choices. He functions as a bridge between Diana and the audience. He understands the world she's stepping into, but he hasn't become numb to it. That's crucial. If Steve were fully cynical, he'd drag the film down. If he were too idealistic, he'd feel redundant next to Diana. Instead, he exists in the middle, pragmatic but hopeful. Their relationship becomes the emotional core of the film, not because it's forced, but because it evolves naturally through shared experience. War, loss, humor, quiet moments, they build something real. The script also deserves credit for how it handles exposition. A story rooted in Greek mythology, set during a global war, and tied to a larger cinematic universe could easily collapse under the weight of its own information. But the screenplay distributes that information carefully. Themyscira handles myth. London introduces politics. The battlefield reveals consequences. You're never overwhelmed because the script teaches you its world step by step. That's discipline. Many blockbuster scripts mistake complexity for depth. This one understands that clarity is power. There were, however, challenges during development. Early drafts reportedly leaned more heavily into the broader DC Universe tone, darker, more interconnected, less standalone. The final version pulls back from that just enough. You can feel the larger universe in the background, but it never hijacks the story. That restraint is one of the screenplay's greatest strengths. It trusts that Diana's journey is enough, and that trust pays off. If there's a weakness, it sits in the final act. The philosophical conflict between Diana and Ares is compelling, but the transition into a large-scale CGI battle slightly dilutes that intimacy. It's not that the action doesn't work, it does, but you can feel the push toward blockbuster expectation. The script sets up a deeply personal ideological clash and then partially resolves it through spectacle. Still, even here, the emotional through line holds. Diana's decision isn't about defeating Ares, it's about choosing what she believes despite him. What the screenplay ultimately achieves is rare for an origin story. It makes transformation feel earned. Diana doesn't just become Wonder Woman because the plot demands it. She becomes her because the story breaks her assumptions, tests her values, and forces her to choose what kind of hero she wants to be. That's character-driven storytelling at blockbuster scale. And that foundation becomes critical when we look at the next layer of the film, the casting. Because a script like this only works if the actors can embody both myth and humanity at once. Get that wrong, and everything collapses. Casting Wonder Woman wasn't just about finding recognizable faces, it was about solving a paradox. The actors had to feel mythic, almost larger than life, while still grounding the story in emotional reality. Get one side wrong, and the entire illusion collapses. And at the center of that challenge was a decision that, at the time, sparked genuine skepticism, casting Gal Gadot as Diana Prince. On paper, Gadot wasn't the obvious choice. She was known primarily for her supporting role in the Fast and Furious franchise, not for carrying a $200 million blockbuster on her shoulders. Critics questioned her experience. Some fans doubted whether she could embody the physical and emotional weight of an iconic character who had existed for decades. But here's what the casting team and Patty Jenkins understood that others didn't. Wonder Woman isn't just about acting range, she's about presence. The ability to walk into frame and shift the energy of a scene without saying a word. Gadot had that. Her background played a crucial role. Before acting, Gadot served in the Israeli Defense Forces, which gave her a natural physicality that couldn't be faked. You see it in the way she moves, not like a performer imitating strength, but like someone who understands it. That distinction matters. Superhero performances often rely on choreography and editing to sell power. Gadot brings an internal sense of discipline that makes even stillness feel authoritative. She doesn't just look like Wonder Woman. She carries herself like someone who believes she is. But physicality alone wouldn't have been enough. The real test was emotional accessibility. Diana begins the story as sheltered, curious, and idealistic. That requires openness. An ability to react to the world with genuine wonder rather than performance. Gadot leans into that vulnerability without making Diana feel naive. There's a fine line there. Too innocent, and the character becomes childish. Too hardened, and the arc loses meaning. Gadot threads that needle by playing sincerity as strength. When Diana believes something, it doesn't come across as ignorance. It feels like conviction. The casting of Chris Pine as Steve Trevor is where the film finds its balance. Pine had already proven his leading man charisma in the Star Trek reboot series, but here he does something more restrained. He doesn't dominate scenes, he calibrates them. That's important because Steve's role isn't to outshine Diana. It's to anchor her. Pine brings a kind of weary charm to the character, a man who has seen enough of the world to understand its flaws but hasn't completely given up on it. That nuance makes him the perfect counterweight to Diana's idealism. Their chemistry wasn't accidental. Reports from production indicate that screen tests focused heavily on interaction rather than individual performance. The filmmakers needed to see how these two energies would collide. And when it works, you feel it immediately. Their dynamic isn't built on cliches, it evolves. Early interactions are playful, slightly awkward. Two people from completely different worlds trying to understand each other. But as the story progresses, that relationship deepens into something grounded and emotionally resonant. By the time the film reaches its climax, their connection carries real weight. It's not just romance, it's transformation. Then there's Robin Wright as Antiope, and this is where casting becomes thematic. Wright brings gravitas instantly. You don't question her authority for a second. She embodies the warrior philosophy of the Amazons: discipline, precision, and a quiet intensity. Her training sequences with Diana aren't just action beats, they're foundational moments that define Diana's understanding of strength. Wright's presence ensures that Themyscira doesn't feel like fantasy fluff. It feels like a culture with history and weight. Connie Nielsen as Queen Hippolyta adds another layer entirely. Where Antiope represents warrior strength, Hippolyta represents protective love. Nielsen plays her with a controlled emotional depth, a mother torn between shielding her daughter and preparing her for a world she knows is dangerous. That tension becomes one of the film's quiet emotional engines. You feel it in every scene they share. It's not loud, it's restrained, and that restraint makes it more powerful. On the opposing side, David Thewlis, as Sir Patrick Morgan, eventually revealed as Ares, brings an unexpected softness to the role. Instead of playing the villain with overt menace from the start, Thewlis leans into subtlety. He feels almost gentle, intellectual. That choice makes the eventual reveal more effective because it reframes everything that came before. It's not just a twist, it's a shift in tone. The enemy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's persuasive. What's fascinating about this ensemble is how intentionally it's constructed around contrast. Strength and softness, idealism and pragmatism, myth and humanity. Each actor represents a different facet of the film's central question: what does it mean to be strong in a broken world? And because those contrasts are embedded in the casting itself, the film doesn't have to over-explain them. You feel them through interaction. There were alternate casting possibilities floating around during development. Bigger names, safer choices. But those might have changed the film entirely. A more established star as Diana could have brought immediate credibility, but it might also have come with baggage, preconceived expectations that would limit the character's freshness. Gadot, in contrast, arrives without that weight. She becomes Diana instead of reminding you of other roles, and that's ultimately why the casting works so well. It doesn't feel like actors stepping into roles. It feels like the film discovered the right people at the right moment. The choices aren't flashy, they're precise. And precision in casting creates something invaluable: belief. Because once you believe in the actors, the performances can do something deeper. They can disappear into the story. And that's exactly where the film goes next, into the performances themselves, where these casting decisions either prove themselves completely or fall apart under scrutiny. The moment Diana steps onto no man's land, the film either proves itself or collapses under its own ambition. And what Gal Gadot does in that sequence tells you everything about why this performance works. There's no dialogue carrying the weight, no exposition explaining what she feels. It's all internal. You watch hesitation flicker across her face. Not fear, but realization. This is what the world actually is. Then something shifts. Resolve hardens. She climbs the ladder. And just like that, a character becomes an icon. That's not accidental. Gadot builds Diana from stillness outward. Early in the film, her movements are curious, almost exploratory. She looks at things like she's trying to understand their purpose. Shoulders relaxed, eyes open. There's a softness to her physicality. But as the story progresses, that softness doesn't disappear. It integrates. By the time she reaches the battlefield, her posture changes, more grounded, more deliberate. She moves with intention, not curiosity. That evolution is subtle, but it's doing heavy lifting. You're not told she's changing. You see it in how she exists in space. What's even more impressive is how Gadot handles emotional contradiction. Diana is both compassionate and furious, often in the same moment. Watch the village liberation sequence. She's fighting with controlled precision, every movement efficient, almost surgical, but her face carries something else entirely. Anger. Not chaotic rage, but focused outrage at injustice. That duality keeps the character from becoming one-dimensional. She's not just a symbol of goodness, she's someone reacting to suffering in real time. And that reaction fuels her strength rather than undermining it. Then there's her chemistry with Chris Pine, which becomes the emotional backbone of the film. Pine plays Steve Trevor with a kind of restrained charisma that never overshadows Diana. Instead, he creates space for her. His performance is built on micro-reactions. small shifts in expression that reveal what he's thinking without needing to say it. When Diana challenges his worldview, you see the internal conflict. He knows she's right in principle, but he's lived too long in a broken system to fully believe it. That tension makes their relationship feel earned. And here's where Pine really elevates the material. He doesn't treat Steve as a traditional hero. He plays him as a man, constantly negotiating between idealism and practicality. There's a weariness in him, but it never tips into cynicism. That balance becomes crucial in the third act. His final moments aren't played for melodrama. They're played with quiet acceptance, no grand speeches, no exaggerated heroics. Just a decision. And because Pine underplays it, the impact hits harder. You feel the absence before the film even moves on. Gadot responds to that absence with one of her strongest emotional beats. The shift is immediate. The warmth she carried through much of the film doesn't vanish. It fractures. There's grief, but also clarity. And that clarity feeds directly into her final confrontation. This is where the performance could have tipped into cliché. Big speeches. Overstated emotion. Instead, Gadot keeps it grounded. Even in the middle of a large-scale battle, she plays the moment as internal resolution. Diana isn't just fighting Ares, she's choosing what she believes about humanity. Speaking of Ares, David Thewlis approaches the role in a way that deliberately avoids the obvious. His performance isn't built on intimidation, it's built on persuasion. When he reveals himself, there's no immediate shift into overt villainy. He stays calm, almost gentle. That's what makes him effective. He doesn't try to overpower Diana physically at first, he tries to convince her, to reframe her understanding of the world. The battle becomes ideological before it becomes physical, and Thewlis leans into that with controlled, measured delivery. But the real strength of the performances lies in how they interact rather than how they stand alone. This isn't a film driven by isolated acting showcases, it's driven by relationships. Diana and Steve, Diana and Antiope, Diana and Hippolyta. Each connection reveals a different facet of her character. Robin Wright brings discipline and mentorship, shaping Diana's understanding of strength. Connie Nielsen brings emotional grounding, reminding her of what she's protecting. These aren't background performances, they're structural. And here's the key, none of these actors overplay their roles. There's a restraint across the board that keeps the film from slipping into melodrama. Even at its most heightened, the performances feel anchored. That's a direct reflection of Patty Jenkins' direction, but it only works because the actors commit to it fully. They trust the material enough not to oversell it. If there's a limitation, it's that some emotional beats in the final act compete with the scale of the action. The performances remain grounded, but the surrounding spectacle occasionally pulls focus. Still, the actors hold their center. They don't get lost in the noise. And that consistency keeps the film emotionally coherent even when it leans into blockbuster excess. What makes these performances linger isn't just their effectiveness in the moment, it's their clarity of intention. Every actor understands exactly what their character represents within the story. No confusion, no tonal drift, just focused, deliberate choices that build on each other. And that's what allows the film to transition seamlessly into its next layer of craftsmanship, because once performances are locked in, the world around them has to rise to the same level. Sets, costumes, environments, everything needs to support the illusion. Because a character like Wonder Woman doesn't just exist in performance, she exists in the world built around her. Great performances can carry a film, but they need a world worthy of them. And Wonder Woman understands that deeply. The production design doesn't just decorate the story, it defines how the story feels. From the sun-drenched paradise of Themyscira to the mud-soaked trenches of World War I, every environment is built to reflect Diana's emotional journey. This isn't just visual contrast, it's thematic architecture. Start with Themyscira. This is where Aline Bonetto establishes the film's visual identity with almost mythological purity. The island isn't designed like a typical fantasy realm overloaded with detail. It's clean, open, bathed in natural light. The architecture draws heavily from classical Greek influences, columns, stone textures, symmetry, but it avoids feeling rigid. There's fluidity in the space. Curved lines. Organic integration with nature. It feels lived in, not constructed for spectacle. And here's the crucial part. Themyscira doesn't feel isolated in a negative sense. It feels protected. That distinction matters because it shapes how we understand Diana's upbringing. This isn't a prison, it's a sanctuary. The color palette reinforces that. Warm golds, deep blues, vibrant greens. Everything breathes. Even the training arenas feel expansive, not confined. You get the sense of a culture that values strength but also harmony. It's not just where Diana comes from, it's what she carries with her into the rest of the film. Then the movie shifts. Hard. London hits like a shock to the system. Gone is the warmth. In its place, muted grays, industrial browns, heavy shadows. The production design leans into early 20th century realism. Crowded streets, soot-covered buildings, cramped interiors. There's clutter everywhere. Papers stacked, objects overlapping. It's a world that feels busy but disconnected, full of movement but lacking purpose. That contrast isn't subtle. It's supposed to feel overwhelming because that's exactly how Diana experiences it. The warfront pushes that contrast even further. Trenches stretch endlessly, carved into earth that looks like it's been wounded. Mud dominates the frame, thick, suffocating, unavoidable. This is where the production design stops being aesthetic and becomes tactile. You can almost feel the cold, the weight of the environment pressing down on the characters. There's no romanticism here, no heroic gloss, just exhaustion built into the landscape. And then comes the village sequence, one of the film's most visually satisfying transitions. After Diana liberates the town, the design shifts again. Color returns. Not in full force like Themyscira, but enough to signal change. Warm lighting fills interiors. Fabrics soften the space. Music, laughter, human connection. It all becomes visible through design. This isn't just a victory in plot terms. It's a temporary restoration of what the world could be. The environment reflects that hope. Costume design plays an equally critical role, especially in how it defines character. Diana's armor isn't just iconic, it's functional storytelling. Designed by Lindy Hemming, the suit balances mythology with practicality. It feels ancient but not ceremonial. Built for movement, not display. The materials have weight. Texture. You believe it can withstand impact. But it also carries symbolic elements. The eagle motif, the structured lines, that connect Diana to her Amazonian heritage. What's fascinating is how the costume evolves in meaning rather than design. When Diana first wears it, it represents identity, who she is. By the time she reaches no man's land, it represents purpose, what she chooses to do. Same armor, different context. That's storytelling through costume. Steve Trevor's wardrobe operates on the opposite end of the spectrum. His clothing is practical, understated, almost forgettable by design. Military coats, worn fabrics, muted tones. He blends into the world because he's part of it. That contrast with Diana, who visually stands apart even when she tries to fit in, reinforces their dynamic without a single line of dialogue. Even supporting characters are defined through design choices. Antiope's armor is sharper, more aggressive, reflecting her role as a warrior mentor. Hippolyta's attire carries more regality, softer lines paired with authority. These distinctions aren't loud, but they're precise. You can read character hierarchy just by looking. Props, often overlooked, are handled with similar care. Weapons feel grounded, not overly stylized, not exaggerated. The lasso of truth stands out precisely because everything else is restrained. It glows, it moves differently. It feels mythic in a world that's otherwise grounded. That contrast elevates it. If everything were fantastical, nothing would stand out. The design understands restraint. There's also a subtle but important use of space throughout the film. Themyscira uses wide, open compositions, characters framed against vast landscapes. London compresses that space-tight interiors, crowded streets. The battlefield flattens it, horizontal lines of trenches stretching endlessly. These spatial choices influence how you experience each setting. Freedom, confinement, stalemate. You don't just see these ideas, you feel them. If there's any critique, it's that the final act leans slightly more into generic, blockbuster design. The environments become less distinct, more focused on scale than texture. It's not ineffective, but it lacks the specificity that defines earlier sections. Still, the foundation remains strong enough that the film never feels visually lost. What Wonder Woman achieves through production design is cohesion. Every environment, every costume, every prop is aligned with the story's emotional core. Nothing feels random. Nothing feels purely decorative. It's all working toward the same goal, making Diana's journey tangible. And once that world is built, there's only one question left. How do you capture it? Because design creates the space, but cinematography decides how we see it. And that's where the film's visual language truly comes alive. The camera in Wonder Woman doesn't just record action, it interprets it. And that distinction is everything. Cinematographer Matthew Jensen approaches the film with a clear objective: make Diana feel iconic without disconnecting her from the human world she's discovering. That balance is harder than it looks. Too stylized, and the emotion disappears. Too grounded, and the myth loses scale. Jensen finds a visual language that allows both to exist in the same frame. Themyscira is where that language begins, and it immediately sets a tone. Natural light dominates. The sun isn't just illumination, it's texture. Skin glows, water reflects, landscapes stretch into the horizon with a kind of painterly softness. Jensen often uses wide-angle lenses here, letting the environment breathe around the characters. The framing emphasizes openness. Nothing feels constrained. Even during training sequences, the camera moves with fluidity tracking, gliding, almost dancing alongside the Amazons. You're not just watching strength, you're experiencing freedom. Then London arrives, and the visual grammar shifts almost aggressively. The color palette desaturates. Shadows deepen. The camera becomes more observational, less lyrical. Jensen tightens the frame, often placing characters within crowded compositions, walls, people, objects closing in from all sides. There's a subtle increase in handheld movement too, not chaotic, but enough to create instability. This world doesn't flow, it stutters, and Diana, placed within it, feels slightly out of sync. That's not performance alone, that's cinematography reinforcing character. The battlefield sequences take this even further. The camera flattens space, emphasizing the horizontal sprawl of trenches and the monotony of war. Smoke fills the frame, diffusing light into something harsh and directionless. Visibility is reduced. Clarity disappears. And Jensen leans into that. Shots linger just long enough to let discomfort settle in. You're not given clean, heroic compositions. You're given fragments, faces, mud, movement. War isn't staged as spectacle, it's framed as exhaustion. And then, no man's land. This is where the cinematography crystallizes everything the film has been building. The sequence begins with hesitation, and the camera reflects that. Slightly restrained movement, measured pacing. Then Diana climbs the ladder, and the visual language shifts with her. The frame opens up. The camera lowers, looking up at her classic heroic framing, but earned. When she steps onto the battlefield, time stretches. Slow motion is introduced, but not as a gimmick. It's used selectively, emphasizing impact, resilience, momentum. Watch how Jensen composes those shots. Diana isn't isolated from the environment, she's cutting through it. Bullets deflect, debris moves around her, the world reacts to her presence. The camera tracks her movement laterally, maintaining orientation so the audience never loses spatial awareness. That's crucial. In many action sequences, chaos replaces clarity. Here, clarity enhances power. You understand exactly what she's doing, which makes every action feel intentional. Lighting plays a major role in that sequence too. Diana is often the brightest element in the frame, not artificially spotlighted but naturally emphasized. Her armor catches light differently than the environment around her. It reflects, it stands out. Without saying a word, the cinematography tells you, this figure does not belong to this world, but she's choosing to stand in it anyway. Beyond action, Jensen shows restraint in quieter moments. Conversations are often shot with minimal coverage. Clean shot, reverse shot setups, but with careful attention to eye lines and distance. The camera doesn't intrude, it observes. This allows performances to breathe. When Diana and Steve share quieter scenes, the framing softens. Backgrounds blur slightly. Focus narrows. The world recedes, leaving just the connection between them. There's also a recurring visual motif tied to Diana's perspective, light versus shadow. On Themyscira, light dominates. In London and the battlefield, shadow creeps in. But Diana is frequently framed moving toward light sources, even in darker environments. Windows, openings, firelight visual cues that subtly reinforce her role as a force pushing against darkness. It's not heavy-handed, it's consistent. Camera movement is another area where the film shows discipline. Action scenes use dynamic movement tracking shots, controlled slow motion, occasional rapid cuts, but they never lose coherence. The camera doesn't spin aimlessly or rely on disorientation to create intensity. Instead, it stays connected to character movement. When Diana accelerates, the camera follows. When she pauses, it holds. That synchronization creates immersion. If there's a limitation, it appears in the final act. The visual clarity that defines earlier sequences becomes slightly muddied by heavier CGI integration. The camera begins to behave more like a traditional blockbuster. Faster cuts, more effects, driven compositions. It's not ineffective, but it lacks the precision that makes earlier scenes stand out. You feel the shift from character-driven cinematography to spectacle-driven framing. Still, the overall achievement is undeniable. Jensen crafts a visual language that evolves with the story. Themyscira feels like a memory. London feels like reality. The battlefield feels like a test. And Diana moves through all of it as the constant framed, lit, and captured in a way that allows her to be both human and myth at the same time. Because cinematography doesn't just show you what happens, it decides how you feel about what happens. And once the visuals lock you in, something else takes over. Something less visible, but just as powerful. The sound. The music. The part of the film you don't just watch, you feel before you even realize it's working. Music in Wonder Woman doesn't just accompany the story, it announces identity. From the first time Diana steps into battle, the score doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. And that signature sound comes from Rupert Gregson-Williams, who builds on an already established musical idea introduced earlier in the DC universe by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL. That now iconic electric cello motif, raw, aggressive, almost primal, becomes Diana's sonic fingerprint. You hear it, and you know exactly who has entered the frame. What makes that theme so effective is its contrast. Superhero scores often lean orchestral sweeping strings, triumphant brass, clean heroic melodies. Diana's theme cuts through that tradition. It's jagged, percussive. It feels like it's clawing its way forward rather than gliding. That edge mirrors her character perfectly. She's not a polished hero stepping into a role. She's discovering what that role means, often through conflict. The music reflects that tension. It's not comfortable, it's alive. But Gregson-Williams doesn't rely on that motif alone. In fact, one of the smartest choices in the score is restraint. The Themyscira, for instance, is scored very differently. Instead of aggressive instrumentation, we get something more ethereal layered vocals, softer textures, a sense of ancient calm. The music here feels timeless, almost detached from the urgency of the outside world. It creates an auditory sanctuary, reinforcing what we see visually. This is a place untouched by chaos. Then the film transitions to London, and the soundscape shifts again. The score becomes more subdued, almost blending into the environment. Industrial sounds, machinery, footsteps, distant chatter start to take precedence. This is where sound design begins to share responsibility with music. The film understands that not every moment needs a score pushing emotion. Sometimes, silence or near silence does more work. And when the film reaches the battlefield, the two elements merge. Music and sound design begin to overlap, creating a layered auditory experience. Gunfire doesn't just punctuate the scene, it becomes part of the rhythm. Explosions don't interrupt the score, they integrate with it. This is where the film's audio design shows real sophistication. It's not just about what you hear, it's about how those sounds interact. Take the No Man's Land sequence again. The music enters gradually, almost cautiously, as Diana makes her decision. Then it builds, not explosively, but steadily. The electric cello theme kicks in, but it's supported by orchestral elements that give it weight. Meanwhile, the sound of bullets hitting her shield, the impact of explosions, the movement of debris, all of it is mixed with precision. Nothing overwhelms. Everything contributes. The result is a sequence that feels immersive without becoming chaotic. Silence, though, might be the film's most underrated tool. There are moments, especially in emotional beats, where the score pulls back completely. No swelling music telling you how to feel. Just space. When Steve Trevor makes his final decision, the sound design strips down. The world quiets. That absence of sound creates tension far more effectively than any dramatic score could. It forces you to sit in the moment, to feel it without guidance. Dialogue mixing also deserves attention. In large-scale action films, clarity often gets sacrificed for intensity. Not here. Even in chaotic environments, voices remain distinct. You can hear intention in every line. That's crucial because the film relies heavily on ideological conflict. Characters expressing beliefs, challenging each other, revealing perspective. If that dialogue gets lost, the story loses its core. The mix ensures that never happens. There's also a subtle use of diegetic sound audio that exists within the world of the film that enhances realism. Music in the village scene, for example, isn't just background score. It's part of the environment. Characters hear it. They react to it. That integration blurs the line between audience experience and character experience, pulling you deeper into the scene. If there's any critique, it's that the final act leans slightly heavier on conventional blockbuster scoring. The music becomes more forceful, more insistent, occasionally stepping into familiar territory. It works in terms of scale, but it loses some of the uniqueness that defines earlier moments. Still, the core identity of the score remains intact. What Wonder Woman achieves sonically is cohesion. The music, the sound design, the silence. They all serve the same purpose, guiding emotional experience without overwhelming it. You're not told what to feel. You're placed in a space where feeling happens naturally. Because sound operates differently than visuals, you can close your eyes and still follow the story. You can't escape it. And once that layer is complete, the film reveals something even more fascinating: the journey behind the scenes. Because for a film this ambitious, what happened off-camera is often just as compelling as what made it to the screen. The making of Wonder Woman wasn't smooth, and that's exactly why it's so interesting. By the time cameras finally rolled, the project had already spent years in development limbo at Warner Brothers. Different directors came and went. Scripts were written, rewritten, and quietly shelved. The character had existed for decades, but translating her into a modern blockbuster proved surprisingly difficult. Studios knew she was iconic, but they didn't quite know how to position her. That uncertainty shaped everything that followed. When Patty Jenkins stepped in, she wasn't walking into a blank slate. She was inheriting a project that had been pulled in multiple creative directions. That kind of history can fracture a film before it even begins. But Jenkins approached it with a clear, almost stubborn focus. This had to be Diana's story first, franchise second. That meant pushing back at times, against broader studio expectations tied to the DC Extended Universe. Not rejecting them entirely, but refusing to let them dominate. That tension between creative vision and studio mandate is baked into the film's DNA. The shoot itself took place across multiple locations, each chosen to serve a specific visual and narrative purpose. Themyscira was brought to life primarily through locations in Italy, particularly along the Amalfi Coast. That choice wasn't just about beauty, it was about authenticity. Real landscapes give weight to fantasy. You feel that in the way light hits the cliffs, in the way water moves naturally rather than through digital simulation. Then, production shifted to the UK for London sequences and studio work, grounding the film in a more controlled, industrial environment. France provided key battlefield locations, adding historical texture to the war sequences. But shooting a film that moves between mythological fantasy and large-scale war drama comes with logistical challenges. Weather alone became a recurring obstacle during the European shoots. Muddy terrain, shifting light conditions, unpredictable rain. It all complicates continuity and scheduling. Yet, in a strange way, those challenges enhanced the film. The battlefield doesn't feel manufactured because, in many cases, it wasn't. The discomfort you see on screen often mirrors real conditions the cast and crew were dealing with. Then there's the physical demand placed on the actors, especially Gal Gadot. Her training regimen was intense. Months of preparation involving strength conditioning, martial arts, and weapons training. But here's the part that elevates that effort. She performed a significant portion of her own stunts. That choice adds authenticity to action sequences. When the camera lingers on her movements, it's not cutting around a stunt double, it's capturing continuity. That matters because it maintains immersion. You believe what you're seeing. One of the most talked about behind-the-scenes realities involves Gadot filming parts of the movie while pregnant. That's not a publicity gimmick, it's a logistical puzzle. Costume adjustments had to be made. Visual effects were used subtly to maintain continuity. But more than anything, it speaks to the level of commitment on set. This wasn't a production coasting on spectacle. It required adaptability at every level. The No Man's Land sequence, now one of the film's defining moments, was reportedly one of the most complex to shoot. It required coordination between stunt teams, visual effects units, practical explosions, and precise camera movement. Timing had to be exact. Too early, and the rhythm breaks. Too late, and the momentum stalls. Jenkins approached it with a clear intention. This wasn't just an action scene. It was a character statement. That meant prioritizing clarity over chaos, even when the scale suggested otherwise. Multiple takes were required to get the balance right. And then there are the smaller, human moments behind the scenes. The kind that don't make headlines but shape performances. Cast members have spoken about the collaborative atmosphere on set, particularly Jenkins' approach to direction. She wasn't dictating performances from a distance. She was engaged, present, often working closely with actors to refine emotional beats. That kind of environment encourages risk. Actors feel safe to explore, to adjust, to find nuance. You can feel that in the final performances. Nothing feels rigid. Of course, not everything went perfectly. Like many large-scale productions, the film underwent reshoots. But here's the key distinction. These weren't emergency fixes. They were refinements. Adjustments to pacing, clarity, and tone. That's an important difference. Reshoots often carry a negative connotation, but in reality, they're part of the filmmaking process. The question is whether they're reactive or proactive. In this case, they seem to have been the latter, fine-tuning rather than restructuring. The production also had to navigate the pressure of expectation. This wasn't just another superhero film. It carried cultural weight, being the first major female-led superhero film in this particular cinematic universe. That adds a layer of scrutiny that goes beyond box office. Every creative decision is amplified. Every misstep would have been magnified. That kind of pressure can either constrain a film or sharpen it. Here, it seems to have done the latter. What makes the behind-the-scenes journey compelling is how much of it translates directly into the finished product. The tension between vision and studio, the physical demands on actors, the logistical challenges of shooting across multiple environments, the careful calibration of tone. You don't just hear about these things, you see their results on screen. Because filmmaking at this scale isn't just about executing a plan. It's about constantly adapting that plan without losing sight of what matters. And once all that work is done, once the film is shot, edited, scored, and released, it faces its final test: the audience, and the numbers that follow. When Wonder Woman finally reached theaters on June 2, 2017, it wasn't just another release, it was a test case. A high-budget, female-led superhero film directed by a woman arriving in a marketplace dominated by established male heroes and increasingly formulaic franchise entries. The industry was watching closely. So were audiences. And the numbers that followed told a story that went far beyond simple success. The film opened to approximately $103.3 million in North America, instantly exceeding many early projections. That figure alone would have been impressive, but context elevates it. At the time, it marked one of the biggest domestic openings ever for a film directed by a woman, placing Patty Jenkins into a category Hollywood had historically reserved for a very narrow group. But opening weekend is just the first chapter. What mattered more was what happened next. Instead of dropping sharply, as many blockbuster films do after an initial surge, Wonder Woman demonstrated strong legs, meaning it held onto audiences week after week. The decline in box office from its opening weekend to subsequent weekends was relatively modest, signaling positive word of mouth. People weren't just showing up out of curiosity, they were recommending it. That kind of sustained performance is often a better indicator of cultural impact than a massive opening alone. Domestically, the film earned over $412 million, eventually becoming one of the highest-grossing entries in the DC Extended Universe within the United States. Internationally, it added roughly $409 million, bringing its global total to over $821 million. Those numbers placed it firmly in blockbuster territory, but more importantly, they reframed industry assumptions. For years, there had been a persistent myth that female-led action films were a financial risk. Wonder Woman didn't just challenge that idea, it dismantled it. And here's where the commercial story becomes more interesting. The film's success wasn't driven solely by one demographic. Audience breakdowns showed a relatively balanced gender split, with strong turnout from both male and female viewers. That matters because it proves something fundamental. Representation doesn't limit appeal, it expands it. The film didn't succeed despite focusing on a female hero. It succeeded, in part, because it offered something different within a crowded genre. Budget plays a crucial role in understanding profitability. With a reported production cost of around $149 million plus significant marketing expenses, the film needed to perform strongly to justify its scale, and it did more than that. Once theatrical revenue, home media sales, and streaming deals are factored in, Wonder Woman became a highly profitable venture for Warner Bros. It wasn't just a creative win, it was a business model validation. The ripple effects were immediate. Studios began accelerating development on other female-led projects, not because of ideology, but because of evidence. Hollywood follows success, and Wonder Woman provided a clear, quantifiable example that audiences were ready, arguably overdue for different kinds of heroes at blockbuster scale. Merchandising also played a role in the film's commercial footprint. Toys, apparel, collectibles. The character's iconography translated easily into marketable products. But unlike some franchise films where merchandise feels disconnected from the story, here it aligned naturally. The shield, the lasso, the armor, they weren't just visual elements. They were symbols audiences connected with emotionally, which made them commercially viable extensions of the experience. Another interesting aspect of the film's performance is how it compared to its immediate predecessors within the same universe. Films like Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Suicide Squad opened strong but faced steeper drop-offs and more divisive reception. Wonder Woman, by contrast, combined solid opening numbers with sustained audience engagement. That combination signaled something important: tone matters. Audiences responded not just to spectacle, but to the film's sense of hope and emotional clarity. There's also the international perspective. While the film performed well globally, its strongest reception was in North America. That's not unusual, but it highlights how cultural context influences box office dynamics. The character of Wonder Woman carries particular historical and cultural resonance in the United States, which likely contributed to its domestic strength. Still, the film's global performance confirmed that its themes, heroism, compassion, moral conflict, translated across markets. If there's any limitation in the commercial story, it's that the film didn't quite reach the billion-dollar threshold that some modern blockbusters aim for. But framing that as a shortcoming misses the bigger picture. Financial success isn't just about hitting arbitrary milestones, it's about exceeding expectations relative to risk. And by that measure, Wonder Woman didn't just succeed, it overperformed. What makes this box office story compelling isn't just the numbers themselves, it's what those numbers represent. A shift in perception. A recalibration of what audiences want. Proof that a superhero film can lead with sincerity, character, and a different kind of heroism and still dominate commercially. But numbers only tell part of the story, because once the financial dust settles, another conversation begins. One that can be even more revealing. How critics responded, how audiences interpreted it, and how the film positioned itself within the broader cultural landscape. Critical reception for Wonder Woman didn't just validate the film, it reshaped the conversation around an entire franchise. At the time of its release, the DC Extended Universe had built a reputation for divisive, often polarizing entries. Critics frequently pointed to tonal heaviness, narrative clutter, and a lack of emotional accessibility. Then Wonder Woman arrived and disrupted that pattern almost immediately. On aggregate platforms, the numbers told a clear story. The film held a Rotten Tomatoes critics score above 90%, with an audience score that closely mirrored that enthusiasm. On Metacritic, it landed in the low to mid-70s, indicating generally favorable reviews with some measured critique. IMDb ratings hovered in the mid-7 range, reflecting strong audience approval without tipping into untouchable, classic territory. But those numbers, while impressive, only scratched the surface. What matters more is why critics responded the way they did. The dominant thread in critical responses was tone. Review after review highlighted the film's sense of sincerity. In a genre increasingly defined by irony and self-awareness, Wonder Woman played things straight, and that choice landed. Critics praised how Patty Jenkins allowed the character to exist without undercutting her with humor or cynicism. That doesn't mean the film lacked levity. It means the humor never came at the expense of its core identity. The result was something that felt, to many critics, refreshingly earnest. Performance, especially from Gal Gadot, became a focal point of praise. Many reviews pointed out that Gadot's portrayal carried both strength and vulnerability without leaning too heavily into either. She wasn't playing a symbol detached from humanity. She was playing a character discovering it. Critics often singled out her ability to convey emotional clarity in moments where the script avoided heavy exposition. That kind of performance resonates because it invites the audience in, rather than instructing them how to feel. The No Man's Land sequence became a near-universal highlight in reviews. Critics described it not just as an action set piece, but as a defining cinematic moment, a scene where theme, character, and spectacle aligned perfectly. It's rare for a blockbuster to produce a sequence that critics and audiences both latch onto as emblematic of the entire film. This one did, and that moment became shorthand for what the film achieved at its best. But the reception wasn't without critique. The third act drew the most consistent criticism across reviews. Many critics felt that the final battle leaned too heavily into conventional CGI spectacle, slightly undermining the more grounded, character-driven approach established earlier. The philosophical conflict between Diana and Ares was widely appreciated, but some argued that its resolution became visually cluttered, losing some of its emotional precision in the process. It's not that the ending failed. It's that it didn't quite reach the same level as what came before. There was also discussion around the villain structure. While David Thewlis brought nuance to Ares, some critics felt the character lacked the complexity or presence needed to fully match Diana's arc. Again, not a fatal flaw, but a noticeable imbalance in an otherwise tightly constructed narrative. Audience response, meanwhile, leaned even more positively. Social media reactions, word of mouth, and audience polling all pointed towards strong emotional engagement. Many viewers connected with the film on a personal level, particularly in how it portrayed heroism as something rooted in compassion rather than dominance. That connection translated into repeat viewings and sustained conversation. The film didn't just entertain, it resonated. Culturally, the impact extended beyond traditional film discourse. Wonder Woman became part of a larger conversation about representation in blockbuster cinema. It wasn't the first female-led superhero film, but it was the first in this modern franchise era to achieve this level of both critical and commercial success. That combination gave it weight. It became a reference point, something other films would be measured against. The discourse wasn't entirely unified, though. Some critics and commentators pushed back against what they perceived as overpraise, arguing that the film's significance and representation may have amplified its reception beyond its technical achievements. That debate is important because it highlights how cultural context can influence critical interpretation. A film doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a moment. And Wonder Woman arrived at a moment when audiences and critics were actively looking for something different. Awards recognition reflected this mixed but largely positive reception. While the film didn't dominate major award categories like Best Picture, it received nominations and wins in areas such as costume design, action choreography, and popular film awards. More importantly, it gained recognition in industry conversations, panels, retrospectives, discussions about the future of superhero cinema. Sometimes influence matters more than trophies. Over time, the film's reputation has held relatively steady. It hasn't undergone the kind of dramatic reevaluation that some films experience years after release. Instead, it remains consistently regarded as one of the stronger entries in its genre and a turning point for its franchise. That stability suggests something important. The film wasn't just a product of hype. It had substance that sustained its reputation. What makes the critical and cultural response to Wonder Woman so compelling is how aligned it is with the film's core identity. Critics responded to sincerity. Audiences responded to emotion. Both recognized something that felt distinct within a crowded genre. Because in the end, reception isn't just about whether a film is good or bad. It's about what it contributes, what it changes, what it leaves behind. And that leads to the final, most important question. What does Wonder Woman actually mean? What Wonder Woman ultimately leaves behind isn't just a successful film. It leaves a redefinition of what a superhero story can feel like. Strip away the spectacle, the box office numbers, the franchise context, And what you're left with is something surprisingly intimate, a story about belief. Not blind belief, tested belief, the kind that survives contact with reality. At its core, the film wrestles with a deceptively simple question: what does it mean to choose goodness in a world that doesn't always deserve it? Diana enters the story with a clear, almost mythological understanding of morality. Good and evil are separate, identifiable, defeatable. But the world she encounters doesn't operate that way. People are complicated. Systems are broken. War isn't driven by a single villain. It's sustained by countless human choices. That realization could have shattered the character. Instead, it refines her. And that's where the film distinguishes itself from many of its genre counterparts. It doesn't build toward cynicism. It builds toward conscious hope. There's a difference. Cynicism is easy. It requires no risk. Hope, especially in the face of evidence to the contrary, demands something more. It demands decision. Diana's final choice isn't based on illusion, it's based on understanding. She sees the flaws in humanity clearly and chooses to fight for it anyway. That thematic core is reinforced through symbolism layered throughout the film. The lasso of truth, for instance, isn't just a weapon, it's a narrative device. It forces characters to confront reality, stripping away deception. But here's the irony: truth alone doesn't solve the problem. Knowing what humanity is doesn't automatically justify saving it. That decision comes from something else, something less tangible: compassion. The film suggests that truth reveals, but love decides. Even the recurring visual contrast between light and darkness feeds into this idea. Diana consistently moves toward light, not because darkness disappears, but because she refuses to let it define the world. It's a subtle but persistent visual metaphor. Light isn't the absence of darkness here, it's resistance to it. The film also engages with gender in a way that feels integrated rather than performative. Diana's strength isn't framed as exceptional because she's a woman, it's inherent. The narrative doesn't pause to justify her presence in spaces traditionally dominated by men. Instead, it allows those spaces to react to her. That shift in perspective matters. It normalizes rather than emphasizes. And in doing so, it makes the character's impact feel organic rather than symbolic. At the same time, the film doesn't ignore difference. Diana's worldview is shaped by her upbringing among the Amazons, a society built on principles that contrast sharply with the world she enters. That perspective allows the film to critique human systems without becoming preachy. It's not delivering a message, it's presenting a contrast and letting the audience sit with it. In terms of legacy, Wonder Woman occupies a unique position. It didn't reinvent the superhero genre structurally. The beats are familiar: origin, discovery, conflict, resolution. But it recontextualized those beats through tone and character focus. It proved that a superhero film could lead with sincerity without losing audience engagement. That's not a small achievement. In a genre that often leans on irony as a safety net, sincerity becomes a risk. This film took that risk and turned it into its defining strength. Its influence is visible in the projects that followed. Studios became more willing to invest in character-driven superhero narratives that didn't rely solely on spectacle. Female-led action films gained increased visibility, not as exceptions, but as viable pillars of blockbuster filmmaking. And within its own franchise, Wonder Woman set a tonal benchmark that later entries would struggle to match. Rewatchability is another measure of legacy, and here the film holds up well, not because of twists or surprises, but because of emotional clarity. You're not returning to see what happens, you already know. You're returning to feel how it happens. The no man's land sequence, the quiet conversations, the moments of realization. They retain their impact because they're rooted in character rather than novelty. That said, the film isn't without flaws. The third act, while thematically ambitious, leans into familiar blockbuster territory in ways that slightly dilute its earlier precision. The villain, while conceptually interesting, doesn't fully match the depth of the protagonist. These are real limitations, but they don't overshadow the film's achievements. If anything, they highlight how strong the rest of the film is, because the bar it sets for itself is so high. So who is Wonder Woman for? On one level, it's for fans of superhero cinema. It delivers action, scale, and iconic imagery. But on another level, it's for anyone interested in stories about moral choice, about holding on to ideals when the world challenges them, about strength that isn't defined solely by power, but by purpose. And that's where the film ultimately lands, not as a perfect movie, but as an important one. A film that reminds you that heroism isn't just about what you can do, it's about what you choose to believe, especially when belief is hardest. And that's why Wonder Woman endures. There's a moment in Wonder Woman that quietly defines its legacy, and it doesn't involve action, spectacle, or even dialogue. It's the moment Diana chooses. Not because she's certain, not because the world has proven itself worthy, but because she decides that belief itself has value, even when it's contradicted by reality. That choice becomes the film's final statement, and it echoes long after the credits roll. What makes that conclusion resonate is how deliberately the film earns it. This isn't a story that protects its hero from disillusionment. Diana sees humanity at its worst: war, betrayal, suffering that doesn't neatly resolve. The film doesn't soften those edges, it leans into them. And yet, it refuses to let that darkness define the narrative. That tension between what is and what could be is where the film lives. And, more importantly, it's where it finds meaning. Let's talk about legacy in concrete terms. Before Wonder Woman, the modern superhero genre had largely settled into two tonal extremes: self-aware humor or operatic darkness. This film carved out a third space. It reintroduced sincerity, not as nostalgia, but as a viable storytelling tool. That shift might seem subtle, but its impact is significant. It opened the door for films that don't feel the need to undercut their own emotion to stay relevant. And then there's representation, not as a headline, but as a structural shift. Wonder Woman didn't just place a female hero at the center of a blockbuster. It allowed her perspective to shape the narrative. The world is filtered through Diana's understanding, her questions, her moral framework. That's a crucial difference. She's not adapting to the story is adapting to her. And that inversion changes how audiences engage with the film. The cultural ripple effect is undeniable. After its success, studios didn't just greenlight more female-led projects. They reconsidered how those projects were positioned. No longer treated as niche or experimental, but as central pillars of blockbuster filmmaking. That shift didn't happen in isolation, but Wonder Woman accelerated it in a way few films managed to do. It became proof, not just possibility. Within its own franchise, the film stands as a tonal benchmark. Other entries in the DC Extended Universe leaned into scale, darkness, or spectacle. But few managed to replicate the balance Wonder Woman achieved between character and mythology. That's not a coincidence. It's the result of a very specific alignment between direction, writing, performance, and design. Remove any one of those elements, and the balance shifts. Rewatch the film, and something interesting happens. The plot becomes secondary. You're not watching for what happens next, you already know. You're watching for how it feels, the way Diana processes the world, the way moments build rather than explode, the way silence is allowed to exist. That's rewatchability rooted in emotional clarity. It doesn't fade because it's not dependent on surprise. Now, let's be honest about its limitations. The third act, while thematically ambitious, leans into familiar blockbuster territory in a way that slightly disrupts the film's earlier precision. The visual noise increases. The intimacy decreases. And while the ideological conflict remains compelling, its resolution competes with spectacle. That tension doesn't ruin the film, but it does reveal the boundaries of the genre it operates within. The villain, too, remains more symbolic than fully realized. Ares represents an idea: corruption, manipulation, the darker side of human nature. But he never quite reaches the complexity needed to fully match Diana's internal journey. That imbalance is noticeable, especially given how strong the protagonist's arc is. And yet, those flaws don't define the film. They exist within it, but they don't overpower it. Because what Wonder Woman gets right, it gets right with clarity and conviction. It understands its character. It understands its themes. And most importantly, it understands what kind of story it wants to tell. So what's the final verdict? Wonder Woman isn't the most technically groundbreaking superhero film ever made. It doesn't reinvent narrative structure or redefine visual effects. What it does is arguably more difficult. It restores a sense of emotional honesty to a genre that had started to drift away from it. It's a film that believes in its hero, and, by extension, asks the audience to believe too. Not blindly, not uncritically, but deliberately. Because in a world that often rewards cynicism, Choosing to believe in something better becomes an act of resistance, and that's what makes Wonder Woman endure, not just as a successful blockbuster, but as a story that reminds you why heroes matter in the first place.